Silent Orphan was found sleeping in the church. The note in her pocket broke the sheriff's heart. The church door creaked like old bones when Sheriff Thomas Wade pushed it open that morning. Dawn light crawled through the colored glass windows, painting red and gold patches across the empty pews. He'd come looking for quiet, the way he always did when the whiskey couldn't silence the ghosts in his head. But quiet wasn't what he found. She was curled up on the third pew from the front, small as a bird's nest, clutching something tight against her chest. A child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with tangled brown hair that caught the morning light. Her dress was the color of dust, torn at the hem, and her bare feet were dirty from walking God knew how far. Wade stopped in the aisle, his hand resting on the gun at his hip out of habit. In his 20 years wearing the badge, he'd found all kinds of things in places they shouldn't be. Drifters sleeping in barns, outlaws hiding in root cellars, but never a child alone in a church, sleeping like she belonged there. He took off his hat and stepped closer. She was breathing soft and steady, the way children do when the world hasn't taught them to be afraid yet. In her arms was a doll made from old cloth, its face worn smooth by small hands. The doll's button eyes stared up at nothing, and Wade felt something twist in his chest. "Little one," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't stir. Wade crouched down beside the pew, his knees creaking loud in the silence. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her lips were cracked from thirst. This child had been traveling for days, maybe longer. "Hey there," he tried again, reaching out to touch her shoulder gentle as he could. Her eyes opened fast, wide and brown as creek water. For a moment she just stared at him, taking in his badge, his weathered face, the way the morning light made his gray hair look silver. Then she sat up quick, clutching her doll tighter. "Easy now," Wade said, holding up both hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." But she didn't speak, didn't make a sound. She just watched him with those big eyes, like she was trying to decide if he was safe or if she needed to run. Wade settled back on his heels. "You got a name, little one?" "Nothing." She blinked once, slow, but her mouth stayed closed tight as a locked door. "You hungry? Thirsty?" Still nothing. But Wade saw the way she swallowed, saw how her tongue darted out to wet her dry lips. This child needed help whether she could ask for it or not. "All right," he said, standing up slow so he wouldn't scare her. "Let's get you something to drink." He turned toward the door, expecting her to follow or at least make some noise. But when he looked back, she was still sitting there, hugging that doll like it was the only thing keeping her together. "Come on," he said, gentler now. "I won't hurt you, I promise." She tilted her head, studying him. Then, so quiet he almost missed it, she shook her head. Wade felt that familiar weight settle on his chest, the one that came whenever he saw something small and helpless. It reminded him too much of things he'd lost, things he'd failed to protect. Part of him wanted to walk away, leave this problem for someone else. But he couldn't, not when she looked at him with those eyes. "You can't stay here," he said. "Church is empty most days. No food, no water." The girl's hand moved to her dress pocket, her fingers pressing against something hidden there. The movement was quick, protective, like she was checking to make sure whatever it was hadn't disappeared. "What you got there?" Wade asked. Her grip on the doll tightened, but after a long moment, she reached into her pocket. Her hand came out holding a piece of paper, folded small and worn soft from handling. She held it out to him, her arm shaking just a little. Wade took the paper careful as he could. It was thin as flower petals, the kind that came from being folded and unfolded too many times. When he opened it, he recognized the handwriting immediately. A woman's hand, shaky and weak. "To whoever finds my girl," the note began. "Her name is Sarah. She don't speak much, but she understands everything. Her daddy died 2 winters past. I'm dying now too, and there ain't nobody left but her." Wade's throat went tight. He'd read plenty of dying words in his time, but these felt different. Personal. Like they were meant for him. She seen what happened the night her daddy died. Banker Morrison killed him for the land, made it look like an accident. I got proof hidden in our old cabin up Mill Creek. Sarah knows where. Morrison don't know she saw, but if he finds out. The letter went on, begging whoever found it to keep Sarah safe, to see that justice was done. It was signed with a shaky M. Fletcher and sealed with what looked like a tear stain. Wade read it twice, his hands steady even as his heart started beating faster. Morrison, the town banker, respected member of the community, the man who'd loaned Wade money for his own spread. Killer. He looked at the girl, Sarah, and saw her watching him with those wide eyes. She'd been carrying this secret, this weight, for who knew how long. A child shouldn't have to hold such darkness. "Your mama wrote this?" he asked. Sarah nodded once, slow. "And she's—" Another nod, and this time Wade saw the tears gathering in her eyes. She blinked them back, but not before he caught the shine of them. Wade folded the letter careful and handed it back to her. She took it and pressed it against her chest, right over her heart. This piece of paper was all she had left of her mother, all she had left of her old life. "Sarah Fletcher," he said, tasting the name. "That's a pretty name." She almost smiled then. Almost. Wade stood there in the colored morning light, feeling the weight of decision settling on his shoulders like dust. He could take this letter to the judge in the county seat, let someone else handle the mess. Or he could pretend he never saw it, never found her. Walk away and let the world handle its own problems. But Sarah was still looking at him with those eyes, still clutching that worn doll and her mother's last words. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard an echo. Another child's voice, calling his name. His own daughter, who died of fever 3 years past while he was chasing outlaws instead of being home where he belonged. Maybe that's why God had put this child in his path. Maybe this was his chance to do right by someone small and defenseless. Maybe this was his chance to be the father he should have been before. The morning light was getting stronger now, filling the church with gold and amber. Sarah watched him, patient as stone, waiting to see what kind of man he really was. Wade put his hat back on and held out his hand to her. "Come on, little one. Let's get you fed." Sarah looked at his hand for a long moment. Then, still clutching her doll, she slid off the pew and took his fingers in her small ones. Her hand was warm and trusting, and Wade felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been locked away for too long. As they walked toward the door together, their footsteps echoing in the empty church, Wade wondered if he was strong enough to protect her from what was coming. Because if Morrison had killed once to keep his secrets buried, he wouldn't hesitate to do it again. But first, Sarah needed breakfast and a safe place to rest. The reckoning could wait until she was stronger, until Wade figured out how to be the guardian she needed him to be. Wade's house stood at the end of Main Street like a question mark against the sky. It was a simple place. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and windows that hadn't been opened in months. He'd built it for a family that never came to fill it, and after his daughter died, it had become more tomb than home. Sarah stood in the doorway, still clutching her cloth doll, taking in the dust-covered furniture and the smell of loneliness that hung in the air. Wade watched her small face, trying to see his home through her eyes. Empty shelves where books should be. A kitchen table set for one. Silence thick as morning fog. "It ain't much," he said, taking off his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. "But it's dry and safe." She nodded once, the same slow nod she'd given him in the church. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the street, her fingers pressed against the glass like she was checking to make sure the world was still there. Wade moved around the kitchen, his boots loud on the wooden floor. He hadn't cooked for anyone but himself in 3 years, and he'd forgotten how small things could look. The tin plates, the single coffee cup, the way one person's belongings seemed lost in all that space. "You like eggs?" he asked, opening the cupboard. Sarah turned from the window and watched him with those careful eyes. After a moment, she nodded. Wade cracked 3 eggs into the iron skillet, the sizzle and pop filling the quiet between them. He'd always been better with his hands than his words, and cooking gave him something to do while she decided whether to trust him. When the eggs were done, He set a plate in front of her and watched as she stared at the food like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Her stomach made a small, hungry sound, but still she didn't move. "Go ahead," Wade said gently. "It's yours." She picked up the fork with both hands, the way very young children do, and took a tiny bite. Then another. Then she was eating fast, like someone might take it away from her. Wade turned back to the stove, so she wouldn't feel watched, but he could hear the quiet scrape of her fork against the plate. When she was finished, she carried her plate to the washbasin without being asked. Wade found himself smiling, the first real smile he'd worn in longer than he could remember. "Your mama taught you manners," he said. Sarah's face went soft with sadness, but she nodded. She touched the letter in her pocket, the way she'd been doing all morning, like she was making sure her mother's words were still there. The rest of that first day passed in small gestures and careful silences. Wade showed her where she could sleep. His daughter's old room, with the quilt his wife had made still folded at the foot of the bed. Sarah ran her fingers over the stitching, gentle as touching flowers, and Wade had to look away from the longing in her face. In the evening, they sat on the front porch while the sun painted the sky red and gold. Sarah held her doll in her lap, smoothing its yarn hair with small, patient strokes. Wade whittled a piece of wood, not making anything in particular, just keeping his hands busy. "That doll got a name?" he asked. Sarah looked down at the toy, then back at him. She opened her mouth like she might speak, but no words came. Instead, she hugged the doll tighter and shook her head. "That's all right," Wade said. "Names ain't always necessary." But he could see the frustration in her eyes, the want to tell him things, the words trapped inside like birds in a cage. Whatever had happened to her had stolen more than her voice. It had stolen her trust in words themselves. The next morning brought visitors Wade hadn't expected. He was teaching Sarah how to make coffee when he heard horses outside. Through the window, he saw Banker Morrison dismounting from his black gelding, his suit clean and pressed despite the dust of the ride. "Stay here," Wade told Sarah, but she was already backing toward the bedroom, her doll pressed tight to her chest. Morrison knocked 3 times, sharp and businesslike. When Wade opened the door, the banker's pale eyes went straight to the small shoe prints in the dust by the porch. "Morning, Thomas," Morrison said, his voice smooth as oil on water. "Heard you found yourself some company." Wade stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Word travels fast. Small town." Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned seeing you with a child at the general store yesterday." "Orphan," she said. "That's right. Poor thing. Terrible to see children left alone in the world." Morrison's gaze drifted to the closed door. "Where'd she come from?" Wade felt the weight of his gun at his hip, the weight of Sarah's secret in his chest. "Don't know. Found her sleeping in the church. Haven't been able to get much out of her." "She doesn't speak?" "Not yet." Morrison nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against his leg. "Well, I'm sure she'll find her voice soon enough. Children usually do once they feel safe." He paused, letting the words settle. "Course, if she's got family somewhere, they'll be looking for her. Missing children have a way of bringing complications." The threat was gentle as silk and sharp as a blade. Wade met Morrison's eyes and saw something cold swimming in their depths. Fear, maybe, or calculation. "I'll keep that in mind," Wade said. Morrison tipped his hat. "I'm sure you will. You've always been a careful man, Thomas. Practical. That's why this town respects you." He mounted his horse with the ease of a man who'd never known honest work. "If you need anything, food, clothing for the child, you know my bank is always ready to help." Wade watched him ride away, noting how Morrison kept looking back at the house, at the windows where Sarah might be watching. When the dust had settled and the street was empty again, Wade went back inside. Sarah was standing in the kitchen doorway, her face pale as winter sky. She'd heard Morrison's voice, Wade realized. Maybe she'd even seen him through the window. "You know that man?" Wade asked. Sarah's grip on her doll went white-knuckle tight. She nodded once, quick and scared. Wade knelt down so they were eye to eye. He hurt you. This time she shook her head, but Wade could see the tremor in her small hands. Not hurt, then, but frightened. Terrified. He hurt someone you loved? The tears came then, silent and steady down her cheeks. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her mother's letter, holding it against her heart like armor. Wade understood. Morrison was the monster in her story. The reason she was alone and afraid and unable to speak the truth that burned inside her. Wade reached out slow and careful, wiping the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. Her skin was soft as flower petals, warm with the trust she was learning to give him. He won't hurt you, Wade said, the words a promise and a prayer. Not while I'm here. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for lies. Then she stepped forward and leaned against his chest, her head tucked under his chin. Wade's arms came around her without thought, holding her the way he used to hold his own daughter during thunderstorms. They stayed like that while the morning light grew stronger. A broken man and a silent child finding something in each other they'd both thought was lost forever. Outside, the town went about its business, unaware that secrets were taking root in the sheriff's house, growing dangerous in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. That night, as Wade tucked Sarah into bed with her doll beside her on the pillow, he made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't let Morrison's threat go unanswered. He couldn't let this child carry her burden alone. Tomorrow he would start asking questions. Tomorrow, he would begin the work of uncovering the truth that Sarah couldn't speak. And somewhere in the darkness beyond his windows, Wade knew that Morrison was making plans of his own. Plans that would test just how far a broken man would go to protect the light that had wandered into his empty life. But tonight, there was peace in the small sounds of someone else breathing in his house, in the knowledge that he was needed again. For the first time in 3 years, Thomas Wade fell asleep with purpose warming his chest like a banked fire, ready to blaze when morning came. 3 days had passed since Morrison's visit when Wade decided to ride up Mill Creek. Sarah had drawn him a map in the dirt behind the house, simple lines and curves that showed where her family's old cabin stood. Her small finger had traced the path twice, making sure he understood. Then she'd smoothed the dirt away like erasing a dangerous memory. "You stay here," Wade told her that morning, checking his gun before sliding it into the holster. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Sarah nodded, but he could see the fear in her eyes. She knew what he was going to look for. She knew what it might mean. The ride to Mill Creek took 2 hours through rough country. Wade found the cabin right where Sarah had drawn it. A small, weathered structure half hidden by cottonwoods, its roof caved in and its walls gray with age. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and sadness. Wade searched carefully, moving aside broken furniture and rotted floorboards. He found what he was looking for in a mason jar buried beneath the stone hearth. Papers wrapped in oilcloth, still dry after 2 winters. A bill of sale for the Fletcher land, signed by Morrison and dated 3 days after John Fletcher's supposed accident. A letter from Morrison threatening the Fletcher family if they didn't sell. And photographs, Morrison with men Wade didn't recognize, shaking hands over deals that looked anything but legal. Wade sat back on his heels, the evidence heavy in his hands. This was enough to destroy Morrison, enough to see him hanged. But it was also enough to get Wade and Sarah killed if the banker discovered they had it. He wrapped the papers back in the oilcloth and tucked them inside his vest. Then he rode home fast, something cold crawling up his spine with every mile. The house was too quiet when he arrived. Wade's boots echoed loud on the porch as he tried the door. Locked, just like he'd told her. But when he knocked their agreed signal, no small feet came running. "Sarah?" he called. "Sarah, it's me." Nothing. Wade felt his heart start to hammer as he drew his gun and kicked in his own door. The kitchen was empty. The bedroom too. But on the table, held down by a coffee cup, was a note in Morrison's neat handwriting. "Sheriff Wade, the child is safe for now. Come to the old mine at sunset. Come alone and come unarmed. Any deviation from these instructions, and you'll find her body at the bottom of the shaft." This doesn't have to end badly for either of you. We just need to reach an understanding. Wade crushed the paper in his fist, rage and fear burning in his chest like acid. He'd failed her, just like he'd failed his own daughter. He'd let someone small and innocent slip through his fingers. But this time, he wasn't going to let death have the final word. The old silver mine sat on a ridge above town, its mouth dark as a grave in the fading light. Wade rode up the switchback trail with his hands empty and his gun belt hung on his saddle horn. Morrison had been clear about coming unarmed, and Wade wouldn't risk Sarah's life on his pride. He found them at the edge of the mine shaft. Morrison in his clean suit, looking like he was conducting business, and two men Wade recognized as drifters who'd been in town too long. They had Sarah between them, her cloth doll torn and thrown on the ground nearby. "Thomas," Morrison said, his voice friendly as ever. "Thank you for coming." Wade's eyes went to Sarah. She was alive, thank God, but her face was streaked with tears and dirt. When she saw him, she tried to run, but one of Morrison's men caught her arm. "Let her go," Wade said. In due time, Morrison stepped closer to the mine shaft, his boot heels clicking on the stone. "First, we need to discuss the future. I know you found something at the Fletcher place. I know because I had you followed." Wade said nothing, but his hand moved instinctively toward his gun belt. "It wasn't there." Morrison smiled. "Smart man. Yes, I have men watching you. Have had since the day you found this child." He gestured toward Sarah like she was a problem to be solved. "The question is, what do we do now?" "Turn yourself in," Wade said. "Face a jury like a man." "Oh, Thomas." Morrison shook his head like Wade was a child who'd said something foolish. "You know that's not going to happen. I've worked too hard building what I have to let one man's conscience destroy it." He nodded to one of his men, who stepped closer to the mine shaft, dragging Sarah with him. She looked at Wade with those wide, frightened eyes, and he saw his own daughter's face in the moment before the fever took her, helpless, trusting him to save her when he couldn't save anyone. "Here's what's going to happen," Morrison continued. "You're going to give me whatever evidence you found. Then you're going to ride out of this county and never come back. The child." He paused, considering. "The child knows too much. She'll have to stay here." The words hit Wade like bullets. "You're talking about killing a little girl. I'm talking about protecting my interests. She's seen too much, heard too much. And she's John Fletcher's daughter. There's no telling what other evidence might surface if she lives to tell her story." Wade looked at Sarah, saw the terror in her face, and felt something break open inside him. All the grief, all the guilt, all the rage he'd been carrying for 3 years. It came pouring out like water through a burst dam. "She's just a child," he said. "She's a witness." Morrison's voice went cold. "And witnesses can be dangerous things." That's when Sarah spoke. For the first time since Wade had found her in the church, words came spilling out of her mouth like she'd been saving them up for this moment. "He killed my daddy," she said, her voice small but clear as a church bell. "I saw him do it. I saw him push Daddy into the river and hold him under till he stopped moving." The silence that followed was thick as smoke. Morrison's face went pale, then red, then pale again. "I was hiding in the trees," Sarah continued, the words coming faster now, like she was afraid they'd disappear if she didn't say them quick enough. "Mama said never to go out after dark, but I heard voices and I wanted to see. Mr. Morrison was there with 2 men, and they were talking about our land. Daddy said no, he wouldn't sell, and Mr. Morrison got angry." Wade watched Morrison's composure crumble as Sarah's voice grew stronger. "He said Daddy was being stupid, said there were easier ways to get what he wanted. Then he pushed Daddy down and held his head under the water till he went still. The other men helped carry him downstream to make it look like he fell." Morrison's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "That's enough. I told Mama what I saw," Sarah said, looking straight at Morrison now with no fear in her eyes. "She wrote it all down in case something happened to us. And I remember everything, every word you said, every face of the men who helped you." Wade saw Morrison's intention in the tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers curled around his gun grip. The banker was going to kill them both, right here, right now. Wade dived sideways as Morrison drew his weapon, rolling toward where his own gun belt lay draped over a boulder. The first shot went wide, chipping stone near his head. The second caught one of Morrison's men in the shoulder as Wade came up firing. The gunfight was brief and brutal. When the smoke cleared, Morrison lay on his back staring at the darkening sky, a red stain spreading across his white shirt. His hired men were dead or dying, and Wade was bleeding from a graze along his ribs. Sarah ran to him, throwing her small arms around his waist and holding tight. "You spoke," Wade said, kneeling down to look at her face. "You found your voice. I was scared they'd hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I couldn't let them hurt you too." Wade pulled her close. This brave little girl who'd carried such a terrible secret for so long. The evidence he'd found at the cabin would clear her family's name. Morrison's death would end the threat. But more than that, Sarah had found the courage to speak her truth when it mattered most. As they walked away from the mine together, Wade realized that saving Sarah had done something he'd thought impossible. It had saved him too. The empty spaces in his heart were filling with something he'd thought was gone forever. The fierce, protective love of someone who needed him. But as they rode back toward town under the first stars, Wade knew their fight wasn't over. The town would have questions about Morrison's death, about the evidence, about the little girl who'd finally found her voice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of the bond they'd forged in fire and fear. Tonight, though, they had each other. And sometimes that was all the victory a man could ask for. The morning after Morrison died, Wade sat in the doctor's office while old Doc Patterson cleaned the bullet graze along his ribs. Sarah waited in the chair beside him, her cloth doll mended with careful stitches and clutched tight in her arms. "Gonna leave a scar," Patterson said, wrapping the wound with clean bandages. "But you'll live to see plenty more sunrises." Wade nodded, watching Sarah trace patterns in the dust on the floor with her toe. She'd been quiet since they rode back from the mine. Not the frightened silence of before, but something deeper. Like she was listening to the world with new ears, hearing things she'd never noticed. "Sarah," Wade said softly, "you all right?" She looked up at him with those brown eyes, clearer now than he'd ever seen them. "I keep thinking about what he said, about how witnesses can be dangerous." Wade's chest tightened. "What about it?" "I was dangerous to him because I saw the truth." She paused, working through the words like someone learning a new language. "But I wasn't dangerous to you. The truth made me safe with you." Doc Patterson stopped what he was doing, listening to the wisdom in a child's voice. Wade felt something warm spread through his chest, something that had nothing to do with the whiskey the doc had given him for the pain. "That's right," Wade said. "Truth between good people makes them stronger." Sarah nodded slowly, then surprised him by reaching over and taking his hand. Her small fingers were warm against his palm, trusting in a way that made his throat tight. By noon, word had spread through town like wildfire. Morrison dead. Evidence of murder and land theft. The sheriff and a little girl who'd seen justice done. People gathered in the street outside Wade's house, not angry or demanding, but curious and somehow relieved. Like a weight they hadn't known they were carrying had finally been lifted. Mayor Hutchins came first, his hat in his hands and worry lines deep across his forehead. Wade met him on the front porch while Sarah played with her doll in the shade of the cottonwood. "Thomas," Hutchins said, "I need to understand what happened." Wade told him everything. The evidence from the cabin. Morrison's threats. The confrontation at the mine. He spoke quietly, aware that Sarah was listening to every word, and when he finished, the mayor was quiet for a long time. "Morrison had friends," Hutchins finally said. "People who did business with him. They're going to want answers. Then give them the truth." Wade nodded toward Sarah. "She's got more courage than most grown men I know." Hutchins looked at the little girl, taking in her mended doll and the way she sat with her back straight despite everything she'd been through. "What happens to her now?" Wade felt his heart skip. He'd been asking himself the same question since they'd ridden home in the dark. I reckon that's up to her. Sarah looked up from her doll, having heard her name in the conversation if not all the words. Wade walked over and knelt down beside her chair. Mr. Hutchins is asking what you want to do now, Wade said. You got any family anywhere? Aunts or uncles who might take you in? Sarah shook her head. Mama said it was just us after Daddy died. No one else. There's an orphanage in Denver, Hutchins offered gently. Good people who take care of children without families. Wade saw the fear flash across Sarah's face, quick as lightning. Her grip on the doll tightened, and she looked at Wade with those wide eyes that had learned too young what it meant to lose everything. Or, Wade heard himself saying, you could stay here, with me. The words hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Wade hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even let himself think them, but now they were out there, true as anything he'd ever spoken. Sarah stared at him. You'd want that. I'd be honored, Wade said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. If you'll have an old sheriff for a father. Her smile started small, just a lifting at the corners of her mouth, then grew until it lit up her whole face. She launched herself at Wade, wrapping her arms around his neck and holding tight. Yes, she whispered against his shoulder. Yes, please. Wade held her close, feeling the places in his heart that had been empty for 3 years begin to fill. This wasn't the daughter he'd lost, would never replace her. But this was love just the same. Unexpected, fierce, and real as the ground beneath their feet. Mayor Hutchins cleared his throat softly. I'll need to file papers. Make it legal. Do whatever needs doing, Wade said without letting go of Sarah. The rest of the day brought a parade of visitors. Mrs. Henderson from the general store came with a basket of clothes she thought might fit Sarah. Doc Patterson stopped by to check Wade's bandage and ended up staying for coffee. Even Reverend Morris came calling, wanting to hear how the child had found her voice in the church where she'd first taken shelter. Each visitor left something behind. A toy, a book, a promise to help however they could. The town was taking Sarah in, making her part of the fabric of their community. Wade watched it happen with wonder, seeing how quickly love could grow when planted in good soil. That evening, after the last visitor had gone, Wade and Sarah sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky red and gold. Sarah had her doll in her lap and a new book Mrs. Henderson had brought, a collection of fairy tales with pictures of princesses and brave knights. Will you read to me? Sarah asked, holding out the book. Wade took it, remembering how he used to read to his own daughter before the fever took her. His voice was rusty at first, stumbling over words he hadn't spoken in years. But Sarah listened with such attention that he found his rhythm. When he finished the first story, Sarah looked up at him with serious eyes. Do you think my mama can see me now? From heaven. Wade's throat went tight. Ido. And I think she's mighty proud of how brave you've been. Do you think she's glad I found you? Wade looked at this small girl who'd walked into his empty life and filled it with purpose again. I think she knew exactly what she was doing when she wrote that letter. Sarah nodded solemnly, then curled up against his side as the first stars began to appear. Wade put his arm around her, feeling the trust in the way she relaxed against him. They sat in comfortable silence as night settled over the town. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The air smelled of sage and the promise of rain. Wade thought about all the evenings he'd sat here alone, drinking whiskey and counting regrets like rosary beads. This was better. This was what he'd been missing without knowing it. Someone to protect, someone to love, someone who needed him to be better than he'd been before. Papa, Sarah said sleepily, trying out the word for the first time. Wade's chest filled with warmth. What is it, little one? Thank you for finding me in the church. Wade kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine that would forever remind him of second chances. Thank you for finding me right back. As Sarah drifted towards sleep in his arms, Wade looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky like scattered diamonds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, papers to file, a house to make more suitable for a child, the daily work of being a father again. But tonight, he had everything he needed. Sometimes God's greatest gifts came wrapped in the smallest packages, carrying the biggest hearts. Sometimes redemption looked like a silent child sleeping in a church, waiting for someone broken enough to understand what healing looked like. And sometimes, if a man was very lucky, he got to learn that love lost wasn't love gone forever. It was just love waiting for a new place to grow. So that's the story for today. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. On a scale of 10 to 0, how would you rate this story? And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay happy and take care.